We have three presenters today. They will be looking at the issue of religion and populism from different angles. Pakistan, Turkey, but also the United States, UK, and Australia. We'll start with Galip, who will talk about Turkish Islamist populism. For about 10 minutes, I've asked speakers to talk about only 10 minutes so that we will have plenty time for Q&A. Galip.
Hi, everyone. Ihsan, do you want me to have a presentation? Because I had
Yes, please.
like 3 slides only.
Yes, please. Share
Okay,
your screen.
I will just open the presentation now. Okay, so yeah, you guys can see it, right? All right, great. My topic is on Turkey, but I will make a very brief introduction as a conceptual introduction as well, although I'm not sure whether Zahid and Josh will follow it or not. It's just my very brief notes on religion and populism. So religion and populism is becoming very important, and populism is obviously it's the zeitgeist of our time. However, religion is becoming an important component of it, and there has been some scholarly discussion on that. Obviously, the most important, the most dynamic discussion is, I argues that populists they are mainly using religion for secular purposes, that they basically instrumentalize religion, simply using religion for popular gain, exploiting people's honest beliefs, and that their own identification with religion is not genuine. The populist identification with religion is not genuine. We can see this maybe more famously in Western Europe, in the case of Front National in France, or Geert Wilders in Netherlands, who are secular people, had actually a lot of clashes with the religious establishments in their countries before. But now are referring to Christianity, Christian civilization as a central component of their religious rhetoric. And the idea is that this does not emanate from religion itself, but it emanates from an attempt to create a civilizational narrative that would essentially include Europe and exclude minorities, and most importantly, Islam and Muslims. So here, the idea is that religion is a tool, an increasingly important tool in the tool set of populists, and what populists do is they hijack religion. However, there's also a second view, and I personally take both of these views very seriously. I don't exclude any of them. I think both of them are valid. The second view argues that religion remains to be an important part of culture, identity, and politics in modern time. Despite decades or maybe a couple of hundred years of secularization, religion is here. It is an important part of the culture, whether in the West or in the East, however you call it, belonging without believing, or believing without belonging, or both. But it still plays important part in our societies. And today's religious populism is a consequence of this persistence of religion in our societies, and therefore it's not surprising, and therefore the instrumentalization argument actually misses this point about the genuine attraction of religion for both populists and, more importantly, for the people, and also the consequence of the role that religion continues to play in politics. And this means that it plays an important role not only in the politics of the populists, but also in general in the politics of other politicians. For example, you look at United States, George W. Bush also used religion a lot in his politics, and we didn't call him populist all that much. Similarly, Bill Clinton also used populism a lot. In Turkey, also there were other politicians, Turgut Özal previously referred to religion a lot. And I'm sure in Pakistan as well, there were other politicians before who referred to populism. Therefore, in my understanding, we need to look at it from both perspectives. We need to realize that, yes, politicians hijack religion, they use it for political purposes, but also there is a genuine side to religious attraction. And third component that I and Ihsan, we're working on this, interested in is emotions. That emotions are key mechanism that ties religion to populism, and that makes galvanizes their importance. Because religion provides this moral claim to populist rhetoric. It may, and therefore it galvanizes people's emotions, and it is a tie with the emotions. Basically, religion through emotions supports populism to a great extent, and we have here especially collective emotions, collective sense of resentment, disillusionment, anger, and religion plays important role in making populism's appeal to these emotions very powerful. And we also clearly see these dynamics in both Turkey and in the United States, that how evangelical support for Trump is very emotional, and also obviously Islamist support for Turkey's Erdogan is also very emotional. So looking at Turkey very briefly, I won't go into so much details. We all know that Erdogan, he started early on as a conservative Democrat, but then after capturing state power in Turkey, he became more and more of Islamist, more so than a Democrat, and populist more so than a politician, basically. And he referred to religion starting with early periods, but also increasingly so in later years during his rule. He referred to religion to refer to his own people as the people and exclude others. And also, he instrumentally used political grievances, but also part of these grievances were real. Again, I don't think of all of the appeals of populists as simply instrumental. I think this also, in a way, somehow, going back to our earlier discussion on Trump, it somehow makes us miss what is really appealing about these politicians, these populists for the people. That perhaps these populists really give voice to some of the grievances that establishment politicians do not raise. And I think in Erdogan's case too, especially in early years, there was this sentiment that there were some grievances, and Erdogan really gave voice to them. But of course, he along with this, he also instrumentally exploited them for political gain as well. And he galvanized his feelings of resentment, anger, insecurity of Muslim masses that were arguably perpetually tortured by Kemalists. Of course, again, he exaggerated these notions, he exaggerated these narratives about the past, but certainly his narratives gave rise to these feelings, which increased his appeal and his support. And he, of course, religion played key role in sustaining his identity politics. One nation under one religion. This was very clear, especially in his approach to Kurds, that instead of giving genuine rights to Kurds, he rather decided to use religion as an umbrella concept to bring Turks and Kurds, or both of them together, rather than again giving ethnic rights to Kurds. He claimed that we are all Muslims in Turkey, and this unites Turks and Kurds. And in later years, however, we have seen Erdogan basically expanding this identity politics to a civilizational level, which I'm sure other presenters will also talk about a bit, that now in most of the countries where this religion and populism becomes a very strong force, we're seeing civilizational narratives in the in populist politics. And here, of course, with Erdogan, we're seeing Ummah notions becoming very popular, and his forays into Middle East and how he justifies that through religious rhetoric, and also, of course, his rhetoric toward the West in general, most importantly, Europe. He had somewhat good relations with Trump, but with Biden, I'm sure we're going to see even more of that against Biden. But generally, religion and populism, I think, is a dangerous mix in terms of galvanizing civilization politics. And the final slide here, this is the last slide, and just a recap of what's happening right now in Turkey. There's a massive economic crisis, the worst one since 2001, and I think it's going to be even worse than that in upcoming years. And Erdogan simply has no solution for this crisis. So previously, Erdogan was successful in economy, and that was very important for giving legitimacy to his arguments about identity, about religion, his forays into Middle East. Whereas now, he simply doesn't have this economic support, and Turkish economy is in free fall right now. But also, he doesn't have domestic actors that he can put blame on to basically siphon off the opposition, and therefore he has no domestic scapegoats for this economic crisis, and he has to look outside. And when you looks at outside, obviously he considers always the West as this existential enemy that is now attacking Turkey. And just a couple of days ago, he actually claimed a national warfare against economic disaster or something of that sort. And he resorts to symbolic politics. And most importantly, we have seen Hagia Sophia case a couple of months ago, that he decided to open this Hagia Sophia museum, which originally was a church, obviously, and then was turned into a mosque by the Ottomans, and then was turned into a museum by Ataturk. And this issue had some symbolic currency among Islamist circles, but obviously it wasn't a big issue, especially it wasn't as big issue as headscarves. I put headscarves because of that reason, that it really did not bother a lot of the Muslims personally in Turkey, that Hagia Sophia is a museum but not a mosque, whereas headscarf really was a bothersome issue because it really just prevented a lot of people from simply entering universities. So there was some real currency to headscarf issue, whereas in the Hagia Sophia case, there is no real currency, and it didn't really win him any appeal or votes, maybe only for a couple of weeks. So this basically means that at this point, Erdogan has run out of even symbolic politics, and the things that he exploits are really not all that powerful to give him an edge right now. He continues to claim moral supremacy over the opposition and uses religion for that purpose. He has been doing this for some time now, but with the economic crisis, even that moral supremacy is waning, because one key thing the opposition is doing, and I think this can provide a lesson to all those others who are fighting against populism is that opposition in Turkey does not really engage with these populist symbolic issues that Erdogan consistently raises. Basically, when the Hagia Sophia happened, right, opposition simply said, well, okay, that's fine. We're going to go there. We also pray along with other Muslims in Hagia Sophia. They didn't make it a big issue because they knew that then Erdogan was going to, this would give Erdogan further credit for what he did, and this would allow him to gain further support by painting the opposition. Whereas the opposition just said, we are also happy with this, which was, I think, morally problematic, but politically, I think it was a good decision to not play into Erdogan's hands right now. So, and opposition is continuing to do this in Turkey. That in recent years, especially this year, they consistently point at economic failures, and they don't really engage with Erdogan's this really crazy and marginal symbolic issues. Cult of martyrdom, similarly, opposition continue to play into these narratives. And again, morally, maybe it's problematic, but it's certainly politically paid off. And Ummah and transnationalism, again, I mentioned this as well before, that this is a civilizational issue, and Erdogan is now trying to use his populist narratives to move into European Muslims and other Muslims in the West and also in the Middle East. We'll see how it goes. I personally don't think it's going to be very successful for him at this point, but because of the mix with religion, I think populism is successful in transnationalizing its appeal as well. That's all for me, Sam. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Galip. Can you please stop sharing your screen?
Yes, I am stopping.
Josh, it's your turn. Thank you.
Who's got chooks?
I'm just going to try and read and share screen at the same time. Is that possible?
I don't know.
No, it is not.
It's not. Okay. No, that's good to know. Okay, so you'll be able to see a chunk of what I'm doing, and just don't peek at what I'm reading. I'd rather at least have some visual sort of aids. Okay. So today I'm going to talk about some work based on my book, The New Demagogues, Religion, Masculinity and the Populist Epoch, which is out early next month. And I'll start with an anecdote, and I apologise for those who've heard it before. But back in late 2016, I was working for the Australian Catholic University and had the opportunity to go to Rome and meet with with several dignitaries at the Holy See and the Vatican, including the Secretary for Relations with States, effectively their Foreign Minister, and the Prefect for the Secretariat of the Economy, who was at that time Cardinal George Pell. So I had a meeting with him, and on his bookshelves were a number of biographies of Margaret Thatcher, which was striking for me because Thatcher talked very openly about there being no society. He shared his concerns on a number of issues, and I asked him, what are the two leading issues facing the church? He talked about identity politics and Islam as the key challenges. And this was at the height of the marriage equality movement, but also at the peak of the Islamic States movement across the Middle East and so on. And it was quite striking for me because it told me that at the very highest levels, the Catholic Church stood in direct opposition both to another faith, or at least key individuals within that church, and also to those asserting human rights in public. And several days later, I met with Olivier Roy at the European University Institute and discussed his new book, Saving the People, How Populists Hijack Religion. And it struck me that his thesis in the book was at odds with my recent experience at the Vatican, and more broadly what I had observed in the Catholic universe, and my experience being raised as a Protestant in the evangelical tradition, in which textualism was absolutely central. And indeed, it appeared to be a conception of religion that assumed public, largely liberal leaders were almost always, if not entirely, representative of a faith. So my experience has demonstrated to me that each religion has deep undercurrents, whereas those not in the ascendancy, be it within the religion or in the nation, believe it is God's will that they should be. And subsequent exposure to other scholars working on populism revealed to me that there was a significant gap in this space. There are very few scholars who've done theoretical work, let alone empirical work, on the relationship between religion and populism. So I've decided in the book to turn my critical lens. I've done a lot of work on political Islam over the course of my career so far. And I wanted to turn that lens because I think everyone looks at Islam in religious studies as, often problematizing Islam. I really wanted to turn that lens and problematize Catholicism and Christianity and look at from an outsider's and insider's perspective. So I do need to give a little bit of attention to the, I should scroll down one sec, to the definitions I'm using here. And I don't have a lot of time to give you those, but I draw on Job's historical and institutional perspective of religion as a structuring principle on the one hand, and as actor and claim maker in secularized settings on the other. So as a structuring principle, religion and its various faith and denominational manifestations has shaped our language, institutions, political frameworks, and conception of morality more than any other organising frame. It remains embedded in our daily lives, even within secular societies, however, is regulated to prevent religious actors from steering our political institutions or competing for primacy with the state. And obviously, secularism has been thoroughly problematised as a concept, in particular its favouritism of Christianity within Western contexts. But really, at its heart, religion in West is grounded in faith that one possesses a universal truth and is an incontrovertible claim maker. So obviously, to that extent, Christian institutions in particular benefit from tax exemptions, discrimination laws, and other freedoms, and mobilise a collective identity to achieve economic, political and social outcomes that reflect their principles. In terms of populism, it's all in the book, but I do talk about populism as a tactic to attain political power. And to that extent, it's an empty shell devoid of belief. That is saying and doing whatever it takes to attain power. And I draw a distinction between religion and its structuring principles, or as structuring principle and faith. And I do recognise faith within the book and my work as a propelling force in which intense personal and collective energy may be articulated and accumulated. Very often we focus on the common good. But I'm particularly concerned with the socio-political dimension of religion, and in particular, textualist claims to possession of the truth to the exclusion of other actors. Now, I'm going to quickly jump a little bit over textualism and the way that it's used and why it's important. Because it really is textualism and theological claims to truth possession, that is an understanding of a unique relationship with God or a supreme deity, are an essential component of all religion. Indeed, the most significant and indeed proudest claim of any theological proposition is to be true. For some deeply pious faith holders, the claim to truth leads to a journey of discovery and attempts to reconcile this with other faith traditions through interfaith work or ecumenicalism or other things. But for many others, the claim to unique possession of truth defines the boundaries of a religious community. Those who use truth claims to demarcate community are identified through this book as textualists or fundamentalists, or through my book. So I'll just give some examples of textualists in history that are now, even to this day, very influential. And just some examples of their framing. St. Thomas Aquinas, writing at the time of the Crusades, the in his book on the truth of the Catholic faith against the error of the unbelievers in 1259, wrote, Muhammad seduced the people by promises of carnal pleasure, to which the concupiscence of the flesh urges us. His teaching also contained precepts that were in conformity with his promises, and he gave free rein to carnal pleasure. In all, this is not unexpected, as he was obeyed by carnal men. Ibn Taymiyyah wrote of, in terms of criticising the Christians and the Jews, it is acknowledged fact that Islam, that the Jews are wrongdoers, disbelievers, transgressors, and deserve the torment and punishment of Allah, and so on. Martin Luther, who's a particularly interesting character, who's been referred to in recent times as a modern medieval Trump, for his populist sort of tactics and sentiments, wasn't satisfied with merely denouncing Islam and Catholicism. He also, of which he wrote numerous treatises, he also criticised the Jewish people, calling them real liars and bloodhounds who have not only continually perverted and falsified all of Scripture with their mendacious glosses from the beginning until the present day. How fond they are of the Book of Esther, which is so beautifully attuned to their bloodthirsty, vengeful, murderous yearning and hope. So some pretty horrible language here, but it aligns quite well with the language used by modern day populists to reach their audiences. So I was meant to talk today to Brexit and the Australian context as well, but given that the US election is in full swing, I thought I'd focus primarily on what's going on in terms of the Catholic Church in the United States. But to understand that, it's important to look a little bit at the background of the key factional divisions within the Catholic Church. These are really vigorously fought and to some extent personified by the current and the previous Pope. So Cardinal Ratzinger took the pontifical name of Benedict the Blessed after two individuals who had influenced his life's work. Pope Benedict the 15th, who was Pope 1914 to 1922, and St. Benedict of Nursia, founder of the Benedictine Order monasteries, who was highly influential in the spread of Christianity across Europe. So obviously Pope Benedict gave a very influential and important address called the Regensburg Address, in which he characterised Islam as inherently violent and irrational through the rhetorical device of a conversation that was held many centuries before. This led to a widespread sort of support, particularly amongst the conservative hierarchy within the Catholic Church, but also amongst populist actors, including alt-right figures such as Mio Yiannopoulos, who in an interview for the Michigan-based Church Militant website declared Benedict his role model in the Catholic Church, stating, Pope Benedict the 16th is still the wisest, most erudite man in Europe. Though I'm sure he doesn't deserve to have me hung around his neck as an admirer, he was also brave enough to declare publicly that Islam's irrationalism is one of the world's great problems. Upon his resignation, Pope Benedict was replaced by Jorge Maria Bergoglio, who became the first Jesuit Pope and adopted the name Francis, after St. Francis of Assisi, known for his care of the poor. This election would prove to be a pivotal turn away from a hardline textualist conservative theology toward one slightly more open to progressive theological positions. That included admitting remarried Catholics to communion and committing earnestly to interfaith dialogue. In 2013, just a week into his position, he called for more dialogues, particularly with Islam, expressing support for migration and arguing the need for Europe to rediscover its capacity to integrate. So amongst many sweeping reforms and alignments made to reflect his approach, he replaced Cardinal Muller, a committed anti-Islamic theologian and the Vatican's doctrinal head, with a Spanish Jesuit, and removed arch-conservative US Cardinal Raymond Burke as a Vatican Supreme Court Justice. And that's led to deep divisions to this day. So many of Pope Francis's current critics appear to come from the United States. Following the 2017, actually, let me go back, apologies. So in 2017, 62 critics of Pope Francis within the church, mobilised by Raymond Cardinal Burke and Steve Bannon, amongst others, signed a filial correction concerning Pope Francis's exhortation on remarriage and communion, and effectively labelled him as falling outside of church teachings and hence as requiring correction. Many of his critics come from the US, including Burke and Bannon, who's a former Trump advisor deeply embedded in far-right populist circles worldwide, particularly Europe. He accused Pope Francis of public actions that indicated a rejection of the truths of faith and the canonical derelict of heresy. In other words, the more liberal theological orientation of Pope Francis stood in contrast to their hardline fundamentalist approach, prompting critics to commence political activism outside the institutions of Vatican power. So they've attacked him on a number of fronts, and they've set up the Dignitas Humanae Institute as a direct response to a growing secularist intolerance to Christians of all confessions that has led to a myriad of attacks on human dignity. So for some time, you had Steve Bannon, who was directly advising President Trump, working closely with an American cardinal to set up an institute in Rome to influence church teachings and to seek to undermine Pope Francis. So populist and actively religious figures working hand in hand. I'm going to scroll down just to some of the American Catholic institutes before pulling all this together. The United States has become a particularly powerful centre of fundamentalist Catholicism. Non-for-profits such as the Napier Institute, Legatus and the Acton Institute are examples of Catholic renewal organisations that simultaneously promote religious liberty and propose libertarian economic approaches grounded in neoliberal free market principles, fused with fundamentalist theological principles. The Knights of the Republic Order seek to restore the prestige and power, quote, of Holy Mother Church in Christendom through the capacity of American Constitutional Republic, whilst the Knights of Columbus define themselves as Catholic men building a bridge back to faith with principles of charity, unity, fraternity, and patriotism. And the picture on the far right, which is probably quite small, unfortunately, of a statue with a sword, is drawn from their website. The latter organisation had almost 2 million members and over $2.2 billion in revenue in 2015. As a fraternal organisation, the Knights of Columbus does not feature women amongst its highly paid office holders, and much of its revenue is donated to charity. However, as some have observed, these charities are Catholic not-for-profits and think tanks that push hardline Catholic fundamentalist political agendas that have been taken up by the right of the political spectrum in the United States. One commentator has named the Knights of Columbus the cash cow of the Catholic right. And more recently, with the election, despite Biden being a practicing Catholic and be the only second Catholic in history, he was outmaneuvered by, or he's been outmaneuvered by Trump in gaining white Catholic support by a 52 to 44% margin, according to the Pew Research Forum. Trump has labelled Biden as against God and against the Bible, and attacked Biden as standing against Amy Coney Barrett's nomination to the Supreme Court as demonstrating anti-Catholic bias. Obviously, the irony being that Joe Biden is a practicing Catholic who lives by his principles. So just to pull all this together very quickly, religious actors continue to align with or against populist actors. The idea of belief over belonging, belonging over belief, I mean, at the end of the day, religious factions are working hand in hand with senior religious actors to shape the world around them. They often play a key role in their quick rise to power. Textualist religious actors are seeking to shape the world around them in line with their principles and have been particularly vociferous in their support of the new demagogues. This is a mutually beneficial arrangement that sees demagogues gain a powerful base of committed supporters and offers textualist actors access to the corridors of power in their attempts to destroy secular boundaries. In some key countries, the Catholic Church is highly active within governments, shaping the exercise of political power and social policies. And I term these in the book, and I go into more detail, the Catholicists. As we talk about political Islam, this is a form of political Catholicism that seeks to return to an era prior to secularism where there's no distinction between church and state. And we see that most enacted at the moment in Poland, where the Catholic Church is working really very closely with the Law and Justice Party, most recently on anti-abortion legislation. And there are now mass protests in the streets about that. So that's a summary of the book, and obviously it's out for anyone interested early next month. Thank you.
Thank you, Josh. Please stop sharing your screen. We don't have much time, but I know that some of you will need to leave, but we can have another 15 minutes for Q&A for those of you who can stay. Now we'll have Zahid, and then after Zahid we'll have some time for Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Ehsan. So in roughly 10 minutes or so, I'll try to talk about the populist leaders in Pakistan. So I'm basically aiming to compare Zulfikar Ali Bhutto from the 1970s with the current Prime Minister Imran Khan. And most of what I'll talk about is closely related to what Ghalib presented in terms of framework for analysis, talking about especially how Islam has been used by both leaders for domestic legitimacy and also politics and for geopolitical purposes as well. So these are the two leaders that I'll be talking about. Zulfikar Ali Bhutto was the 9th Prime Minister, and Imran Khan is the current Prime Minister. Some quick similarities about both of them. Both studied at Oxford. Good and aggressive speakers. I'll talk about that later on as well. Western lifestyles. Both, although Imran Khan has changed himself a lot in recent past. But then my presentation will mainly focus on their rhetoric, anti-Western, anti-American, with a focus on Pakistan's sovereignty and also Islamophobia, mainly in the West, and the whole anti-India discourse coming from both leaders and how that plays a role in terms of domestic politics vis-a-vis Pakistan's Muslim identity, and how they both, for example, used Islamic rhetoric, mainly with reference to Islamic socialism and also Islamization. So interestingly, because military is a key player in Pakistan's domestic and foreign policies, so I wanted to begin by just giving a brief sort of introduction of how both Bhutto and Khan have been closely affiliated with the military. So, for example, Bhutto was a foreign minister under one of the dictatorships, military dictatorships, and was also in then the second military regime in Pakistan. And Khan was similarly in the government of Pervez Musharraf, General Pervez Musharraf. And his current government has been blamed for being supported or selected by the military in Pakistan. I won't get into those details because the purpose of this presentation is to focus on the xenophobic populism in Pakistan, which is not new. So the contexts were very similar in many ways. Pakistan since 1947 was in the Western Bloc, but it's a very embarrassing sort of defeat in a war with India that led to Pakistan's disintegration, and the creation of Bangladesh played a key role in the rise of anti-Westernism in the country in the 1970s. So Bhutto withdrew Pakistan from the Southeast Asian Treaty Organization, which was a military alliance with the US. And then there was a complete sort of change of hearts in Pakistan with reference to the US and the West. He blamed the US for protests against his government, and one of his very famous speeches, again, and the point that he was a very aggressive and a very good speaker as well. So often people quote his speech from 1977 to the National Parliament, in which basically he spoke a lot against the US and also the West. So Imran Khan, similarly, in the post 9/11 context, when Pakistan was collaborating in the war on terror and also became a victim of terrorism at home that led to economic costs and human costs. So his whole then anti-American and anti-Western discourse became strongly linked to the war on terror, and also he has been anti-imperialist, blaming other leaders for being subservient to first to the British and now to the Americans, basically. And the Islamophobia, I think, Islamophobia in the West has been a key aspect of his domestic politics and also foreign policy. He basically says that the West doesn't know much about Islam, and maybe that's responsible for the Islamophobia. Big U-turn he took with regard to the IMF is that during the election campaigns, he had promised that he would never beg to the West, but again, he had to go to the IMF to get more loans. So in terms of anti-India, India is a key aspect of Pakistan's national identity, because in 1947, the partition was based on the religious identity. Pakistan was created for the Muslims of the Indian subcontinent. So it has been a key feature since then of domestic politics and also foreign policy. And for Bhutto also, Bhutto's populism was characterized by a heavy dose of anti-India rhetoric, as after analyzed or argued in one of his papers. Similarly, Imran Khan used this anti-India position during the elections by blaming the opposition party leader Nawaz Sharif, for example, for being a friend of Narendra Modi, Hindu nationalists. And now his current government's position is that they label Hindu nationalism with India, or equate Hindu nationalism in India with Nazism. And this is one of the pictures which has been published in newspapers, on many websites in Pakistan. But again, another key feature of Imran Khan's politics is that he's trying to, at the same time, show that there is secularism within even his politics, by opening, for example, this Kartarpur corridor, through which now Sikhs from India come for pilgrimage to Pakistan, and his government has approved the construction of a Hindu temple as well. So all these things, developments are happening. So now I'll come to the central part of the presentation, which is about the use of religion and how religion has been used as a tool for legitimacy by the populist leaders. So Bhutto also, at the time when Pakistan was departing from pro-Western policies, used pan-Islamism. The Organization of Islamic Cooperation Summit was hosted in Pakistan for the very first time, and Colonel Gaddafi in Libya called Pakistan the citadel of Islam in Asia. Basically, Bhutto wanted to sell the idea of developing Pakistan's nuclear program by labeling it as Islamic bomb, and he was successful because a lot of funding came from the oil-rich Arab countries. And at the same time, Islamization was started in Pakistan, and Ahmadiyyas were, for example, declared as a religious minority in Pakistan. But central to his whole politics was the slogan of Islamic socialism. He claimed pro-poor policies by providing, for example, his popular slogan was Roti, Kapda aur Makan, which is bread, clothing, and shelter. So similarly, Imran Khan has been talking about Riyasat-e-Madina, or Islamic welfare state, has been talking about Islamic revivalism. But I argue that it's mainly because he's also trying to counter a lot of attacks from opposition parties that still call him a Zionist agent, because his first wife was Jew from the Britain, and they give all those examples to counter his position in politics. Again, similar to Bhutto, he has been in favor of pan-Islamism or Ummah's unity. tried to mediate between Iran and Saudi Arabia, for example. And again, he has been talking about that West has misunderstood Islam, and that was also the central argument of his speech at the UN General Assembly a year ago. There have been a lot of educational reforms. For example, Arabic has been made compulsory in one of the biggest state in Pakistan, which is Punjab. Turkish soap operas have come to Pakistan only because Imran Khan likes them. So, and they have played a key role also in the Islamization in the country. So I'll quickly move to the conclusion. I know I'm left with 20 seconds or so. So while Bhutto used anti-Americanism to also counter domestic opposition to his government, Imran Khan has also blamed the previous government for being subservient to the West, mainly to the British and now to the America, especially with reference to the war on terror. And Imran Khan's main argument during the election campaign was centered around these US drone strikes into Pakistan. And so genuinely there were people had grievances, especially from the northern areas and northwest of the country. And that became his, one of the strongest vote banks that brought him into success in the previous elections in terms of establishing a government in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and later on the central government as well. And so anti-India, although Imran Khan initially wanted to negotiate with India in terms of various conflicts, and now I think his government has come to conclusion that there's no point in discussing with New Delhi. And both have used Islam for legitimacy to whatever extent possible at home and also abroad. So at home, I think Islamic socialism has been at the heart of populism in the country, and Islamization, it's too early to say in which direction Imran Khan is going, but Islamization that started during the Bhutto's era has since then has progressed a lot in the country, and Imran Khan is also, I think, using it to his benefit. So I'll just stop here and I'll be very happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Zahid. We have a few questions for Galip and then another question for all three speakers. Galip, can you combine all these three questions and answer them at once, if you can, please?
I want to just one question.
We cannot hear you.
Oops. Can't hear me?
A little better.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So I will just wrap it up. I'm sorry that I won't be able to answer each question. There were, I think, at least 3 questions. But I think generally the idea is that maybe in terms of strategic point of view, how should the politicians respond to this religious populism? And I was giving example from Turkey, and I think it can apply to United States and other countries, but not fully, because in Turkey, media atmosphere is completely dominated by Erdogan, and therefore alternative narratives, opposition narratives are not allowed. And it means that countering Erdogan's religious populist narratives on national TV is not all that possible. And whatever the opposition says, Erdogan is going to paint it on his own media the way he wants. Whereas in the United States, the media is relatively free, and obviously Trump does not dominate all the media, and therefore his egregious remarks can be clearly opposed and criticized on the media. Therefore, I think it's a better strategy in Turkey in that they constantly refer to an economy that is collapsing, and not playing into Erdogan's populism, because that's a battle that they would certainly lose, because they don't have the tools to reach the people They can only reach via Twitter, which is very marginal to Turkish politics. I think it's even marginal to American politics as well, but certainly to Turkish politics. And even now there's increasing restrictions on Twitter as well. And in general, I think even in the United States, what's really key is that we should understand that populists, they are dealing with some of the real issues that their voters engage with. It's not all about populism that they get vote for. Like, for example, I used to live in Florida. I lived there for 7 years. And right now, I know religious Muslims in Florida right now who voted for Trump in this very election for various reasons, because of tax cuts, because of, for example, some Turks voted because they thought Biden was bad, was worse for Erdogan, for example. And I know these people personally, and they vote for Trump. And is it because of white supremacy or all the other things that that media maybe constantly talks about, Twitter constantly talks about? Certainly no. There are some real issues. So, for example, a lot of Cubans in Florida voted for Donald Trump, and that's how he won Florida, right? Why did they vote for? Because Obama tried some rapprochement with Cuban regime, and Trump came in and he said no, and he basically repealed that policy. And a lot of people care about that, right? So in general, what I can say is that it's not all about populism. There are some real policy issues in the United States, in other countries as well. For example, Ihsan mentioned that, some even minorities don't want other minorities to come in. And that's a real interest issue, right? That's about personal interest. It's about jobs, it's about money, it's about personal interest, and it's not about identity. So therefore, identity politics does not determine votes in all instances. I was just looking at Ohio, where big majority of unionists voted for Donald Trump. So, and why? Most probably because they think with Joe Biden, they will not even have jobs, right? So there are some real issues, and yeah, that would be my answer, that we need to look at those issues.
Firdaus raised a hand. Do you have any question?
Yes. I'm just trying to ask for the same speaker. No, we were countering the populism through counter populism. Populism, is that the crisis we are facing? I think the same question was written in a different form. So can't we face the populism through rationality and through alternative intellectuals, say, and especially in Turkey, regarding the Sophia, that place which was converted into mosque, and what was the religious understanding of the critics as an alternative to the Erdogan's position? And because if India, we as outsiders, we are unable to read anything from outside, maybe because it's not coming on other languages. But do we really have the religious kind of a revival where they want to set to the values and critiques the populist agenda of the Erdogan also, at least with regard to that the institution which was converted into the mosque? I just want to understand.
Josh, can we continue with you, and then we can come back to this question? But this is also a relevant question for other contexts as well, and I'll ask Zahid to answer this too. And there is another relevant and related question from Ahlan Mustafa here. I am interested to hear what is the moral standpoint on populist discourse, if it will help in ensuring that the wrong people stay out of power. For example, combating Trump's populist propaganda with a counter discourse that plays on people's emotions and identifications.
Yeah, so my research was across three contexts. In particular, of interest here are the UK and US. So I did fieldwork in Birmingham in the UK and in a place called Hazleton in northern Pennsylvania, which is right at the heart of what's going on in the US voting and everything right now. And I was speaking to a lot of men in particular, and anger is a key emotion that's been used and manipulated by Trump, by Nigel Farage and others. This sense of being out of control, of going nowhere in life, that you're not on a, you've kind of hit your peak, and everything from there on has gone crashing down due to a faceless government of elites and so on. I mean, that's I don't think it's a moral or a moral problem to basically counter the discourse with the fact that these people have a right to be angry about what's going on in their lives. And I suppose if you can capture that anger effectively, and I think Biden in particular really tried to capture that anger by consistently talking about his working class roots, that he was from Scranton and so on. I'm just looking, I mean, moral, contemporary politics is in many ways populism. The most popular person gets elected. So there's nothing wrong from my mind, at least, in drawing attention to why people feel angry, what's being driven. It's just that Trump was more effective in mobilising that than Hillary Clinton. She was seen as part of the problem. This time around, I think Biden's managed to circumvent that.
So I'll also respond, Assam. So I think with reference to Pakistan, I think there are certain fault lines that exist ever since the existence of the country. So the role of the military, and then all the political parties, one point I missed in my presentation, that all the political parties, doesn't matter, Islamists or secular parties, they all use religion for their politics. So there is no kind of Islamist monopoly over the use of religion in the country. So in terms of dealing with the populist discourse, I agree with Josh also that one has to address these root causes that have led to people's grievances. So in Pakistan, for example, the war on terrorism, and what happened to people in the northwest of the country, also structural issues of violence, considering ethnic politics. What gives me hope is actually not the way political parties operate, but civil society in Pakistan is very vibrant. And they have been talking about some kind of a national dialogue to deal with this xenophobic populism, which in Pakistan has sort of returned from the 1970s to now recently in the shape of Imran Khan's Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf.
Thank you, Zaid. Mark, do you have a question?
Yes, I had a question for Josh. I was just thinking about the issues you're raising about textualism and fundamentalism, and just see if you could just distinguish a little bit between the fundamentalism one sees among evangelicals in the US is largely a United States creation, a kind of 19th century creation, while the Catholic Church rejected that, and one sees that, for instance, in the fact that the Catholic Church never had a problem with evolution, while obviously you have all those weird dinosaur parks in southern states of the US. So, so these two, what I was really asking is, these two strands come from different places. I'm just wondering if you could just talk about that a bit.
That's a great question, and probably take way more time than we've got, but I'll try and sort of summarize. I mean, I'll look at the role that religion has played in the US throughout its history, and in particular Puritanism, but also it became a bastion of freedom of religion in many ways. It was seeking to escape the confines of Europe, and that's the basis upon which it was founded. That said, it's given way to not only many competing, and there is a strong Puritan sort of tradition there, but it's given way to many competing Protestant sects. And Catholicism in many ways came over as an import with its own distinct theology, its own distinct social teaching, and was always viewed suspiciously by the Protestant majority in the US. And so I think over time, what we've seen, and what's quite interesting, is that In some ways, Catholicism stood apart and was even a little bit more progressive in some ways than some of the evangelical traditions and so on in the US. But over time, it's developed a strong factional alignment with hard right politics, because it's seen as liberalism seen as having watered down Catholicism. Every time they allowing abortion, women's rights, everything else is seen as watering down the essence of what Catholicism should be. And so there's in particular amongst conservatives and textualists, there's a strong backlash against that. And that's aligned with certain states. It's particularly strong in Pennsylvania, for example. It's particularly strong on the East Coast. And I think over time, it's evolved. It's evolved a hard edge. And now, if anything, the bulk of the resistance to Pope Francis is coming, the real power is coming from the US. So that's probably what I could talk to in the time available, but I can chat more offline.
Thank you. Any other questions? Galip, can you go back to Firdau's question?
I just want to briefly comment about the question about morality in politics. And I think in general, approaching politics as this arena of a moral battle is not productive, either from scholarly or most importantly from political perspective. People have real interests, and these real interests can be most importantly economy, but also can be religion, can be identity, and many times people they make decisions that make contradictory, like in the case of the people that I know, religious Muslim in Florida, voting for Donald Trump. Why? Because he likes the tax cut more than he hates Donald Trump's anti-Islamism, anti-Muslim rhetoric. And this is real. These people have real interests, and therefore we shouldn't just assume that Donald Trump is this racist, anti-Muslim, civilizationalist, and religious Muslims will not vote for Donald Trump. No, people have this capacity to rationally think for themselves and make an assessment and make a decision that this guy serves me better than the other guy, regardless of the rhetoric. And I think when we look at that, it becomes more clear how we can counter terrorism, how we can counter populism, especially religious populism, and how Hillary Clinton miserably failed, especially in the Rust Belt, that she just couldn't preach to those people who were desperate for jobs, desperate for work, and she was considered to be very very disconnected, basically, and that's why the working class people, a lot of them, voted for Donald Trump in 2016, and it looks like now there's more of a balance there, and that's how Donald Trump is losing, I think, this time.
Thank you. We have 2 more minutes to go. Any comments, feedback, or question? Thank you all. This was fascinating. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. Bye-bye.